Hi, everyone. Um, on any given day, you can find my best friend and me sitting in the same spot at lunch, chatting about high school drama and eating bright and early at 10:30 a.m. This was our daily routine until one day I noticed she was not her usual self. Ever since, I have watched my best friend navigate the immense challenges of an emerging disability that transformed her life. Whether it was managing the symptoms of POTS and dysautonomia, facing partial paralysis in her stomach, or being diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I have seen her confront these obstacles with incredible strength and resilience. To this day, she is a true role model to me. Her experiences have shown me how often we take life for granted and how crucial it is to educate ourselves on disability research and the challenges faced by the disabled community. Tonight, I'd like to honor this introduction to her. My name is Anjali Vajan, and I graduated from Rutgers University in May as a psychology major and double minor in health and society and women's gender and sexuality studies. I am also a leadership scholar alum at the Institute for Women's Leadership. This past June, I joined the Yale School of Medicine as a postgraduate research associate, focusing on the influence of stress and trauma and its effects on substance use disorders and people living with HIV. I am honored to welcome you to this important conversation about creating a world where disability is recognized, supported, and understood, including the complexities of disabled relationships. At this time, I would like to introduce our featured guest, Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. Leah is a non-binary femme, disabled writer, and disability and transformative justice movement worker Burgher and Tamil Sri Lankan, Irish, and Galician Roma ascent. They are the author or co-editor of 10 books, including The Future is Disabled, Prophecies, Love Notes and Mourning Songs, Beyond Survival, Stories and Strategies from the Transformative Justice Movement, and Tonguebreaker and Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. Their fifth collection of poetry, The Way Disabled People Love Each Other, is out spring 2026. Joining Leah in conversation is Dr. Roxane Gay. Dr. Gay is the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies, which is a collaboration between the Institute for Women's Leadership, the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Department in the School of Arts and Sciences, and the School of Communications and Information. She is also a writer, editor, and professor. She is the author of several best-selling books, including Bad Feminist, Hunger, Difficult Woman, and Opinions, a decade of arguments, criticism, and minding other people's business. She is also the author of the Eisner Award-winning World of Wakanda for Marvel and the editor of Best American Short Stories 2018. Her short stories and essays can be found in Harper's Bazaar, American Short Fiction, and many others. She is a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and the editor of an eponymous imprint at Grove Atlantic. In 2018, she won a Guggenheim Fellowship. She is working on several books, films, and television projects at the moment. Her newsletter, The Audacity, is hosted at Substack. I would also like to thank ASL interpreters Liel Tulis and Letitia Bino and CART captioner Kay Pettigrew for their dedication to tonight's event. Lastly, please find a link to purchase Leah's books in the chat. With that being said, I'd like to welcome our incredible speakers tonight.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for that wonderful introduction, Anjali, and welcome to Rutgers virtually, Leah.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Roxanne. And Anjali, I'm seconding the thank you for that warm introduction. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your Monday night to hang out with us as we're chatting. My name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I use they, them pronouns. I'm going to visually describe myself. I look really ghostly right now, like more than usual, but I am a sand skin, mixed race, Sri Lankan and white, non-binary femme. I am a young looking 50, whatever that means. And I usually am visiting with folks from Philadelphia, but I'm actually coming to you from Algonquin territory north of Ottawa in Canada right now. And me and Roxanne are going to talk and ask questions and hang out and conversate. And I think we're going to take some of your questions too. But I wanted to start out by giving a talk called They Have Wars, We Have Poems, and reading some poetry. Um, so I'm here to talk about disabled creativity and cultural work as a strategy and a weapon in the time we find ourselves, which is a time of war, fascism, and eugenics that is incredibly dire. And that's moving with really deliberate, speedy brutality to cudgel our brains, bodies, and spirits into a shutdown. I don't know about you, but there are many days I wake up and I'm like, well, every single thing that we predicted, it's happening, and it's happening worse and more surreally than I could have predicted. And I think that's true for a lot of cultural workers, is that we are, as Disability Visibility Project writer Alice Wong says, like we're disabled oracles. Like we see what's coming and we predict it. And that's some of our work as disabled creators. And it's also still incredibly surreal to wake up every day living in it. And it's even more complicated to figure out what do we do about it. Um, so a lot of this talk is me exploring the essential tension of my title, which is we do have poetry, they have guns and wars and empire. And the thing is that the oppressive systems, they're also not unbad at using rhetoric. They actually, unfortunately, got really good at it, especially in terms of manipulation, optics, using culture as a boot of fear and repression. And also as a, hey, you're scared by this increasingly scary world. Great, we're going to give you some really simple stories for that. Some people are good, some people are bad, and we'll just kill off the latter. And when I was refreshing this talk for this fall, I was remembering, I don't know if you remember, but it was, a year ago, which is like 15 years ago, where there was a Trump rally where Tucker Carlson was presenting as well. And I just remember watching it, and the whole crowd started chanting "Daddy's home, Daddy's home, Daddy's home" when Trump took the stage. And I was like, yeah, that's what's coming. That's what we're up against. And the left really had an edge when it came to a culture for a long last couple of decades. I think that we were sexier and freer than the right in a lot of ways. And that phrase of Arundhati Roy's, where she said another world is possible, sounded and felt really great and possible. And I think that because of the literal heating up of this planet, the right is really like, well, fuck freedom, fuck sexiness. Let's just actually make things simple. Um, and then you're living in a world where people, including a lot of people I love, and including me some days, are honestly disassociating a little bit to survive the times and are like, I don't know if I want the truth. I want media that's going to help me check out a little bit. I want something that's going to lull me to sleep a little bit. And I have spent a lot of time over the last 2 to 5 years, but especially the last 2 years, really thinking about how I came up as a writer and a cultural worker who was raised in a tradition of this is the simplest and most complicated thing in the world. The power of the truth is really final. Um, that when you tell a story that's just true, it can change everything. I have a lot of obnoxious bumper stickers on my car, and one of them says books change lives. And I really believe in that. And I've staked my entire life as a cultural worker on that belief. And I think the question becomes what happens when more and more people, including people who are your people, sometimes are like, actually, the truth's a little bit too hard for me right now. What do you do? And I'll segue by saying that disability justice has always been a movement of cultural workers and storytellers. Sins Invalid, which is, I would say, is the first disability justice organization to exist. It's an intensely political organization, but it started and continues as a performance art collective about disability, sexuality, race, desire, colonization in the body. And back when I started working with Sins, people would be like, "Oh, is it a policy org?" And I'd be like, "No, we do weird performance art about disability and race and sex." And people would be like, "Oh, is there enough material for a whole hour?" And I'd be like, "Fuck you." But that's where we were. Um, and this is really on purpose, and it's a disabled creative strategy, right? Because um, the recently passed on Patricia Byrne, who's an incredible Haitian and Japanese queer disability organizer, revolutionary poet, co-founder of Disability Justice, thought leader, creator of Sins Invalid, the person who brought me into disability justice. She told me a story once that I've repeated many, many times since, where early on, I actually asked her, should we be doing more like Disability Justice 101 workshops? And she looked at me and she was like, she kind of laughed under her breath and she was like, you know, I've actually done a million workshops to convince disabled white people, to try to convince disabled white people to not be racist and to not invisibilize disabled BIPOC lives. And she's like, I've also done a million workshops to try and convince abled BIPOC people to not always forget about disability, or have internalized ableism, make them hate themselves. And then she said, you know, I could do workshops or I could make a 5-minute long piece of performance art that engages someone's dreams and nightmares and desires and fears about histories about disability and the body and their needs. And I could fuck them up and change their life through that 5 minutes of poetry. And she's like, that's what I decided to do. And this to me is just one example of a disabled creative practice and strategy. And it's disabled on purpose. It's something that is spoons efficient, right? Like, you know, I mean, it takes a million hours to make a good piece of performance art, but how much more efficient is it for somebody who doesn't have a lot of energy to see 5 minutes of poetry and be like, wow, that just changed my entire life. Like that changed everything that I thought about disability in my life. That made me tap into and witness and rethink the stories I've been living with about disability in my life and body in a way that reading a piece of theory for 5 hours wouldn't have. Like, how brilliant is that? And that's one example of a disabled cultural tactic as a weapon. Um, and I have a million others. Like, I think about things like Street Side Sound System, which is a group of folks in London who, you know, over a year ago now wrote me because they were like, yeah, we're collecting poems and prayers and songs recorded by folks who are housebound or bedbound due to disabilities, including long COVID, and can't be in the streets in Palestinian liberation protests. So record what you want to say, and we're gonna blast all of that stuff and do it with ASL interpretation outside of the House of Commons in London, right? That's one strategy. Or disabled Palestinian poet Rasha Abdulhadi writing on October 11th, 2023, almost 2 years ago, wherever you are, whatever sand you can throw on the gears of genocide, do it now. If it's a handful, throw it. If it's a fingernail full, scrape it out and throw it. Conversations, protests of any size, BDS at work, school, worship, refuser of labor, anything you can reach. Rasha's words were something that myself, Alice Wan, and James Shee took to heart when we started our initiative, which is called Crips for East and for Gaza, almost a year and a half ago, when we three disabled Asian writers were all like, you know, I speaking for myself, I was like, I went on one long march and then I was on in bed on an ice pack for 3 days. I can't actually do street activism right now with the way my body is. But what's a time-honored disabled tactic? It's the crowd fund. Let's raise some money so that people in Gaza can have internet. And we just hit 3 million Canadian. And I will be really happy for the day where we don't have to do that fundraising anymore because there's peace and liberation. But that's also an example of disabled brilliance, creativity, and solidarity that comes from our disability, not despite it. And I'm saying this all because, you know, just to be disabled bleak, I think that a lot of times people are like, what do you mean disabled poetry? What do you mean disabled creativity? What do you mean disabled activism? You guys just have fucked up bodies and then you die. And then I'm like, no, we have histories and culture and practices and arguments. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about rhetoric and then I'm going to read some poetry. But I want to say that, you know, for the past, I would say 15 years, I've been at a moment in my career and part of cultural communities where a lot of people who are my peers and myself have argued that, you know, one of the purposes of art and cultural work is the possibility model, right? It's like to show what could be, because if you don't see it, if you don't witness it, you don't know if it's possible. And that could mean show that we as disabled folks are really beautiful and powerful and good. Show a really good future that could happen and how we get there. And all of that is helpful and needed in a world that says that we're ugly and we suck and we're better off dead, or where we can't actually, or where we're encouraged not to imagine what a good, liberated future could be. And yet, I want to say that the power of disabled writing to me has been a lot more than writing just the goodness, the beauty, the possibility, the future. Our strongest work has actually been in our refusal to lie, and it's been in our commitment to not just tell the stories of happiness and goodness and beauty, but to also be like, let's tell the stuff that's real. I remember years ago, a friend of mine who's an incredible Black disabled artist was actually watching an early Sins Invalid show, and she was like, I love this, and I love all the lifting up of the beautiful disabled body. And also, she's like, I want to write a piece where I write about my catheter came out when I was having sex with my partner and I sprayed him in the face with urine. I need to write that story because actually, our communities really deserve things that aren't lies, even when they're not lies, but they're like the really pretty, ooh, it's all going to work out part. We don't just exist to write the fairy tales, we exist to write the real, real. And 3 years ago, I published a book called The Future is Disabled, which was written in a time of both really hard early pandemic years of witnessing loved ones die due to the medical industrial complex and racism and ableism. And also out of a hope that sometimes feels really bittersweet because it was written between 2020 and 2022 within the abolitionist Black uprisings of 2020, within so much mass mutual aid that was going on, within a time where there was this moment where I was like, wow, the world's really been crimped because everybody, because of COVID, has to care about what we disabled folks have been caring about and practicing for years, whether it's online access, whether it's viruses, whether it's wearing a mask, like there's all of this mutual disabled practice. And there were so many of us who were like, there's this moment where we could have a care revolution, right? Because so many people are witnessing, like, wow, when you can like cancel your doctor's appointment and not get charged $200, when it's okay to be depressed, when there's room in the world for grief, so many more things become possible. And I also was talking about what many of us have felt for a while, but I was like, well, with COVID, we're actually moving from a world that is much more disabled than the powers that be want to admit. That's at least 30% disabled. And I know there's many people who don't say yes to the disability question on a census, on a census because of it doesn't feel safe. And I was like, well, now living within COVID, we're moving to a world that is majority disabled because so many people have some form of long COVID or neurodivergence from living through this pandemic. And I was like, there's so much chance here to seize power. And recently, I made a joke on Facebook because I'm old that, yeah, the future's disabled, and right now it kind of sucks because the backlash against the promise and the possibility of all of that care, of all of that disabled world, of all of that, what if we shifted to a slower, more care abundant, more loving, more weird, more divergent reality. The powers that be are not going out without a fight, and they hate that because there's no money in it and because it threatens their power. And they're so terrified of the demands and brilliances of our slow, hyper-fast, sensitive, sick, brilliant bodies and minds that need care. Um, and so within all that, the question then comes back to what does it mean to be a disabled writer in a time that feels like many people want it to be a post-truth time? I would say that it's a trip. It's really hard and it's a responsibility and it's still delicious and worth it. And it's also the only thing we can do. So I want to take us back to some not so basic texts that are really part of all of this work for me. And then I'm offering to you, if you're somebody that's feeling like, what do I do in this moment that is so terrifying, where speaking, writing, creating out of a disabled neurodivergent body just feels like absolutely unsafe and impossible. Um, I'm going to go back to the beginning and say that Audre Lorde, as we know, wrote, "Poetry is not a luxury." And she continued to say, "It's a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action." June Jordan wrote, "Poetry is always for the people and it's always a time of war." She also wrote, "Poetry is a means of telling the truth with maximum impact, minimum words." Both June and Audre lived disabled Black realities, right? Those knowledges come out of their disabled Black queer poetic brilliances. Laura Hershey, a white disabled queer ancestor, wrote, "When I say disability, I mean all the brilliant ways we get through the planned fractures of the world. When I say living in America today, I mean thriving and unwelcome, the irony of this, the only place in time. When I say cure, I mean erase. I mean eradicate the miracle of error." She said, "When I say safe, I mean no pill, no certified agency, no danger to my self-court order, no supervisory setting, no nurse can protect or defend or save me if you deny me power." She also wrote, "When I say tell the truth, I mean complicate, cry when it's no longer funny." Um, and I want to make sure that we have time for poetry on my end and also for me and Roxane to talk. So I'm going to sum up some of the things that were in my next page of writing. Um, but I go back to all of those truths as truths that undergird the disabled poetic writing that I'm trying to do right now in my life, and I want all of us to do in our lives right now, wherever we fall on the disability identity spectrum. Um, I want to say that Palestinian poetic tradition has shown us that writing through and during genocide is not just possible, it's necessary. It's a responsibility and it is a means of resisting both literal and cultural genocide. If you write it down, it can't be erased, even if you try. I think that when I talked about Crips for eSIMs, I mean, we're, an organization that just raises money for the internet, but I think that it's not a mistake that it came from three disabled Asian poets because we understand the power of communication. We understand the power also of the wild disabled idea, which is a concept I've written and spoken about recently, of the really amazing life-saving work, disabled work, that comes from disabled failure. When you bang into ableism and you're like, well, shit, that doesn't work. What's the quote unquote crazy idea that I come up with that's going to work instead, right? Um, I also want to name that not separate from any of this, I come from and working in the lineage of a radical queer and feminist Sri Lankan poetic tradition that wrote before, during, and after 3 decades of civil war. And some things that I'm calling on right now that don't feel separate from disability, because we know that wars are one of the biggest sources of disability and disabling conditions, are that that tradition deliberately often shows opaqueness and writing anonymously, right? I know so many Sri Lankan feminist writers who were on the island during the war and in diaspora who deliberately wrote with pseudonyms anonymously, did not write for credit, did not write for awards, did not write for ego, because they knew that that was a tactic to get our work out there and not be taken away in a white van. Um, some of the best loved and respected Sri Lankan feminist writers, like the great Sri Lankan theater artist Sumathi, deliberately did that for years and years and years. And that's something I think about now when it's a really tricky time of writing where we had 10, 15 years of use the internet. You can have 20,000 people follow you, blow up, and then all of a sudden the internet is the panopticon, which it's always been, but it's more so. And, my best friends talk about, well, what do I want to do before they put me in the trans camp, right? And every single person I know, whether we can or not, is thinking about what our plan is to escape the country or hide or fight. Um, it's really strength-giving for me to remember that I come from my father and my grandmother, who lived in Sri Lanka and Singapore during times of immense repression and censorship. And my grandmother lived there as a Sri Lankan socialist feminist teacher. And that it is absolutely possible, and that we come from people who know how to get our words out in whatever way they can get out, whether our names are attached to them or not. Um, I was recently listening to a podcast where Ishmael Butler, who people might know from Diggable Planets or Shabazz Palaces, or in Seattle, the Black Constellation, with all of their work as an amazing hip hop artist and, multi-hyphenate artist, where he was talking about how he's like, yeah, my writing in hip hop comes from gender Black traditions of writing in code, right? And that many of us Black and brown folks have written deliberately in codes that not everybody can understand. And what Ishmael said was, he was like, he's like, I come from a tradition where we write in code and the right people can understand it. And those codes help you literally know how to get free and escape. And I think not everything is helped by being intelligible to absolutely everybody. Our work is to be radically true and to tell it our way to our people and to escape capture from those who want to capture us. So without further ado, I'm going to share some of my most recent work that I'm hoping will serve as some examples of all of the above, and all of which come out of disabled mixed-race Sri Lankan poetic traditions. This first piece is a piece that I think of as something that poetry can do is poetry as memory, as time travel, and as radical question. Thursday, November 23rd, 2023. In the thick dust of death in a dry mouth, in 78 tons of buried bone, in a curl of children in one incubator, eyes naked, accusing, and alive. In the angel gay face starting the morning Instagram, hello, I'm still alive. In the stranger friends on Jitsi plotting arrest cheerful. In the friend who can't look at supermarket meat anymore because it reminds them of body parts once child held by father. In the place where all the bullshit falls away, it calls, what will you do? What will you do? Disabled queers march on Washington for a free Palestine. Heart in Duwamish by the boat, heart in Toronto, heart but with Bisan, heart wherever there's a fight. Body back in my night kitchen unpacking boxes. Body march 5 aching rehab miles, stopping every few blocks to stretch pain. All the access supplies made it in the access wagon except the SI belt. But my friend picks up a drop scarf of Palestinian colors and ties it tight around my busted L5. I'm so old. And so is war. This one isn't even that old yet, as we, 300,000, not 10,000, shout fuck Joe Biden for hours at this barricaded white dome that rules us. 10-year-old brown boy darts through the outer fence to give a finger. His mother alarms, come back, you'll be shot. We're at the very center of the anus of the axis of evil. Know me sign. I represent hundreds who couldn't be here. Next to us, a block-long scroll of all the dead whose names we know. Odes and elegies and lamentations of the disabled dead is political because remembering our loved ones is political. This is for my friend Stacey Park Milbern, the incredible Southern Korean queer organizer who died 5 years ago now. When your friend dies like Jesus on her 33rd birthday, and you get the call, and you think she woke up from surgery, you can write your disabled BIPOC rom-com screenplay for Netflix now. Everything worked out, all the prayers and good wishes the email to her friends asked for. You were never really that worried. You'd felt the calm hand of God all around her, and it turns out you were right, but it was holding her different than you thought. When your friend dies like Jesus on her 33rd birthday, it stops your clock with a smashed hand. Your mouth makes the words no, 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 no. You howl, break, and then you spit out the absolutely ridiculous words. I'm supposed to be on a conference call with 4 of our friends about whether we should take the Ford Foundation disabled art money in 22 minutes. I can't be on that shit. You were going to ask her advice about whether or not to take it. You can't do that now. You call up one of the other 4. He goes, no, no, no. You break, you call, you text, you break the news. Everyone picks up, mildly surprised you're calling, but glad to hear from you until you tell them. I want you to know. I know you know. Your death was met by cripple howls of grief all over the world. You were loved more than most of us are. Me screamed driving down the highway on cripple autopilot, my lizard brain sealing the curves that put thousands of miles on my car. All the years I didn't move home to be your neighbor. SeaTac to Fedway, Tacoma Dome to Tacoma Mall, JBM to the Lacey exit and the food co-op sign. I'm digging for fire. You're digging for fire. That's what you were doing with all of your life. Talking to myself out loud to you in my old coffee cup, bumper sticker, bad smell car like the crazy bitch that I am. I don't want to live in a future where you're a memory. And I'm looking at the time. I am going to read 2 more. I'm going to read this one, which is very tongue-in-cheek and real. It's called I Want to Kill the Entire Medical Industrial Complex for You. Roxane saying I have plenty of time. Thank you. Um, I want to say very clearly, this is arch, and this is irony, and this is rage, and this is not literal. but this comes from a place of a lot of rage of the medical industrial complex killing our friends and loved ones as disabled people. I want to kill the medical industrial complex for you. I want to kill every fucker who killed you and Carrie Ann and Jerica and Heather and people I don't know and now won't because ableism killed them. Who might, and his dad did, kill you because you were a fat Asian femme with a vent in her throat who needed a damn cancer surgery. I won't forget how long they left you in that hallway after that CAT scan. No vent, no pain meds, hallway. I want to kill every motherfucker who's ever said to me, "Oh, I don't think we really need to do a biopsy. Oh, I don't really think you need that medicine. Oh, I didn't think to check the lymph nodes." I want to kill every one of those bastards who want to kill us with pats on the head, 4-hour hold times, and indifference. Everyone who told me to just trust them, who asked if maybe I was just a little depressed, who refused to give me imaging a few of the million times I asked. I want to murder the ones who told me they didn't really care if I understood what was happening to my body, they just cared if they could charge me for it. I want to commit murder, which will just start to make up for the time they said your life was worth less than the $1,000 the antibiotic you knew needed cost. Go ahead, call me another autistic mass shooter risk. I don't care. No made-up murder I talk about in a poem can make you be alive again. And I'm going to read two more because Roxane said I had time. My next book of poetry is called The Way Disabled People Love Each Other because I think we love each other a lot and we love each other complicatedly and in ways that go outside the abled imagination. So this is called I Love You Like an Autistic Person Does. I love you like an autistic person does, and I mourn you like an autistic person does too, with too many tears for far too long. Not the 2 weeks permissible, but months after. And sometimes when I wake, and sometimes when I sleep, and sometimes 7 hours curled up into the orange couch boat, I cry the heart, I echo, echo, I miss you so much. I mourn you in my big autistic silent singing house I live in by myself with my two cats. This is where I live. This is the place you never saw. This is the place that was inaccessible so you could never have made it into. But you were still here. You are in these angry fuchsia pussy pink walls, this fireplace. I was going to move and then it came to me singing, "My room and yours were where the second act of our friendship lived." I saw you in person once a year, but we were constantly entwined in texts and Zoom lectures and webinars we co-taught and snarky, snarky texts during and in between us explaining what ableism was to blinking heads. You texted me in bed and I texted you in bed. We sent each other gifts. All that time, these pink walls witnessed our friendship. The way my old roommate said, whenever I heard you two laughing on the phone, I thought that's Leah talking to their sister. And you were. The way an autistic orphan has a sister. The way autistic people, the way disabled people love each other. And I don't know, all my poetry is autism all the time because I'm autism all the time. But I want to say that on this night, where that motherfucker in office is about to say that all of my autistic wonderfulness and everyone's autistic wonderfulness is due to Tylenol. And where they're not even joking about seeing us as people that they want to eliminate, it's more and more important for me, and I hope you're getting that writing these poems of like autistic life, autistic joy, autistic love, autistic community, um, with honesty, with, writing and complicating when it's no longer simple, are more important more than ever. And this last poem I'm going to read is actually in Sarah Clark, who is an incredible autistic Indigenous poet. They actually have a collection coming out online that's poems of autistic resistance that's going to be out this November that I can try and find a link for. But they published Anomaly and Bee Stung and a lot of disabled autistic BIPOC writing online. Um, and this piece is called On My 50th Birthday. On my 50th birthday, I have my 50th birthday with my autistic demi-polycule where no one is normal. my two autistic DJs spinning, and all my autistic friends. I blow out my autistic double coconut birthday cake with my autistic masked face. I write this autistic poem the next day after I lose my autistic verbal speech after 6 hours of autistic on autistic birthday, and point at things as my autistic friends load up our cars with the flowers and clean up the autistic trans party space. I get autistic adorations like a giant Dunkin' Donuts thermos and two sorry for having great tits and correct opinions t-shirts that are just slightly different so I can work them into my autistic uniform lineup of 10 black miniskirts and a bunch of t-shirts that say shit like this. I go home to sleep, a childless cat non-lady, diagonal in my autistic big bed with my cat purring after getting a midnight kiss from a lover who said they could always claim ADHD but not autism till last year because they were like, well, I can sort of survive capitalism. None of us are surviving capitalism that well, and I almost didn't have this party because the asshole in chief was going to launch the Insurrection Act. But corny as it may sound, yes, we are indeed an insurrection. This shout of unregistered autistic trans joy, screaming the Stevie Wonder happy birthday song through our masked autistic faces, loving on my masked autistic 50-year-old surviving ass as I blow out all the autistic candles. So, all of these are just a few of my examples of the weapons I use as a disabled cultural worker to reshape this world and to refuse the erasure of this world and to honor disabled lineage and memory out of the gifts of my body and mind and neurotype, not despite it. And in this time of peril, I really urge you to continue to be in the lifelong crisis of finding and honing and using yours. My friend Claire Bayard, who was writing recently, there's somebody who lived through Katrina, and they were writing on living through Gazan genocide on the 20th anniversary of Katrina. And they wrote, I won't forget what was lost, but I want to be here for who has survived. And on this first early night of Rosh Hashanah, on this fall equinox, my wish is that we may continue to write and create wildly for all of those goals together, because I still believe we're going to make it to the other side. Um, Thank you for listening and witnessing to me. And Kay, I see your hand.
Thank you so much, Leah. And Kay, we see your hand. What's up?
Hi, thanks. It was just for a bit of a pause for captions to catch up, but I think we're good.
Cool.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I appreciated both that talk and the poetry that you shared. And, as I think about the current climate we're in, I just don't know how we think about writing, activism, love, joy, any of it without thinking about the current climate. And words and cultural work more broadly are some of the most effective tools that any of us have. So, how do you do that work in a climate that is increasingly censorious?
Mhm. My answer is not going to be everybody's answer. And of course,
Of course.
I always am like, no, but I always am like, no, just do this, it'll work. I find myself really, really grateful that the choice I made for myself, that in some ways was chosen for me, was to be mostly outside of institutions. I have friends who are on Campus Watch who have gotten death threats, and I was actually hanging out with an ex-girlfriend from 20 years ago, and she was like, "Do you want to get a PhD?" And I was like, "I am so grateful I'm outside of academia right now." And it's not, and that's not simple because we need to be inside academia. We deserve to be inside these institutions that our lineages have fought for us to be in. And I know that for me, I was always a little bit too sick to have to make it. So I chose precarity as the
Mhm.
strategy that would work for me. And it's got its ups and downs for sure. But I know that for me, I have a little bit of freedom in my positionality to write and do what I want. And so that's one thing I'm thinking about. I'm really, really grateful. Like, I believe in a diversity of tactics always, but I'm really grateful for the continued existence of independent media. And I also, as like a 50-year-old, like I'm just emerging out of this mid-career retrospective at Tangled, which is a disabled and deaf art gallery space in Toronto. And one of the central parts of it was me talking about coming up in the 90s and aughts and doing a lot of like very DIY, very grassroots, like
Hmm.
zines, like you throw the show in the abandoned grocery, you do whatever, there's no money in it, and you figure out ways to survive, but you do your work. And I'm also somebody like I have had access to institutions and spaces, and
Hmm.
I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for all the work people did to be like, let's fund disabled brown artwork. And I'm also grateful that I can remember how to do it without money. And I think that that's something that helps. I think we have to be really nimble. I think that I feel, a lot of it comes down to brass tacks where I'm like, I'm glad I live in a city that is poor as F and where compared to so many people I know, I have affordable rent. So I can afford to make less and my costs aren't as high. And I'm also in an ecosystem of a lot of poor and working class writers who are living in Philly because you can get cheap rent and you can do work. I think that that helps me stay free. And I don't know. I think back to both when I was starting as a writer, where I was like, well, I don't really have a lot to lose, so I might as well go for it. And I feel like I pull on that strength now, even though it's a lot of years later. And I have had the good luck and good fortune of having books published and awards and things like that, and like recognition. I'm really glad to be like, well, there's some things that I've got to lose, and there's also some things I don't, so I might as well just really keep chipping away at the truth. And I guess, and I know this is like the long answer to the first question, but I really wrestle a lot with, I spoke a little bit about like social media, internet, like being tools that so many of us who are grassroots writers have used to get our work out there, right? And how it's kind of been like a losing, what is it like? God, there's a phrase, it's a phrase I'm not remembering where like you are getting less than you're getting less back than you put out.
Yeah.
Right, you know that, you know what I'm talking about. And like that's the thing I've been wrestling with because I remember the time not that long ago where I was like, wow, I'm sick and disabled, but I can put some shit on Instagram and 20,000 people saw it. And a lot of them are disabled folks of color who are at home who are like, oh my God, I'm really vibing with this. And now the choke holding is so intense that I'll put the same thing out and like, 89 people will see it because of the censorship, but also it puts me at risk. And I'm really thinking a lot more about gathering in our backyards, gathering in speakeasies, gathering offline. I have a really close friend and long-term collaborator who's doing a 20-year anniversary show in Seattle where he's like, I want people to come together and I don't want people to film it. Like I just want people to be present.
Hmm.
And it's tricky because like we know that we deserve the world, first of all, and we deserve to be able to use the internet and fast communication to reach tens of thousands of people and communicate. And I want us to not give that up, but I also want us to figure out the ways to work in more analog and private ways so we can get some stuff out that's not then going to become a soundbite that ends up with us being doxxed.
Hmm.
So some of that and my community, like I mean, I think all radical collective work is collective, right? And I
Yes.
think that's especially true with disability because we're still so marginalized in particular ways that having other community members who I'm not one star, like I'm in a big constellation and we support each other. Like that helps me stay brave enough to keep being free and creating.
Hmm. It's interesting what you say about that tension between staying analog and preserving. There's something very unique and special about that. And then also recognizing we do deserve the world and making it available to a wider audience. And have you found ways of navigating that tension where you can sort of get the best of both worlds, where you might have an event or an activity that is largely offline but is
Mhm.
archived and preserved in some way?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, let me think about that because like the
Mhm.
answer is probably yes, but I gotta think about what it is. But like the first thing that came to mind when you asked me that question was I think that like one thing that I've chosen, which is like an interesting choice and a little bit unique, whatever, is that um what is it? My last five books, they're all out on Arsenal Pulp, which is like Canadian publisher, independent queer BIPOC press, one of the first presses to have a disabled section. And they're Canadian, so they're in like a slightly different form of settler colonization, but one that has national arts funding where the entire NEA literature department didn't just get eliminated and has like disabled arts funding. And like there's so many independent presses in Canada that get national funding in a way that's never been true in the States.
Mhm.
And it's something where, I feel like so many people I know who are friends in the US are like, well, there's Big Five, there's like some indies, there's like really small presses, and that's kind of it. And I'm just like, yeah, I kind of chose something that's like the secret third thing where I'm like, it's Arsenal's really known to have like really good distribution and have some really great underground hits and is a little bit outside of the fray of US censorship because it's right over the border, but still
Mhm.
has reach and distribution in the States. And I've had people ask me, like, do you want to go for a big five? And I'm like, sometimes, yeah. I mean, I would love to pay off my student loan debt someday. Here's hoping, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not getting the big
it is the
advances in that
dream.
kind of, yeah, it's the dream. The dream is the end of capitalism where there's no money anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and I have friends like Alice Wong is somebody I think of who, her memoir and her books are on Random House. And like I've had friends not quite question it, but kind of like be like, big five. And I'm like, no, like she did that because she wanted that work to get out there, as broadly as possible in ways that people aren't even going to pick up Arsenal pulp. So I think that's great. But yeah, and so that kind of speaks to like we deserve the world. But I guess like jumping back, I think my press is one way that I found like the choices I've made where I'm like, yeah, I can use more money and more reach, but like I want the independence more. That's something that I've chosen. And then in terms of archiving, yeah, I mean, I've saved everything, and I think I know I'm not unique. Like I think that like all of us who are marginalized writers that I know, I mean, Roxanne, I don't know if this is true for you, but I just feel like we save every scrap of every gig,
Hmm.
and like, and actually, like, for the perform, the show that I just did, like, it was funny because when we were designing the postcards, there was a moment where the designer was like, "Well, I just kind of want to put a QR code on it," and I was like, "No, we got to put like the date and time and location, both because not everyone knows QR codes, and also I'm like." This is going to go in an archive, and I don't want to depend on technology that's going to read the QR code. In terms of analog stuff, like I mean, I'm still going back to like in-person performance, but like I think like yeah, videotaping it. One thing that comes to mind is I Want to Be With You Everywhere, which is a disabled arts collective
Hmm.
that I've done work with that draws people from all over, but that is based in New York. And the first festival was 2019. It was pre-pandemic. It was pre a lot of things, and it was like 3 days in person, one offline. But we photographed it, we documented it, we held on to it, we filmed it, and then, COVID hit, we couldn't gather in person as disabled people. So in 2023, we were like, okay, people have had vaccines. Let's have one day in person, masked outdoors at PS New York, which is one of the, only accessible spaces in New York City. And let's also have it be hybrid. And we also filmed it, so we recorded it. And it was like, you had to be there because I think there is something really special about you go there and it's like the one time you get to see that art. But that also, we filmed it. So 2 years later, when I'm doing my show, I was like, we could show those clips and be like, this is really important because it's capturing a disabled moment in time where we hadn't been in public, a lot of us, for 3 years. And
Hmm.
we really needed that disabled, beloved, majority BIPOC disabled community. And so we were physically there, and that was the experience. But also 2 years later, I could be, with the show I just did, being like, here's this moment in time that we videoed. And y'all who came through to Toronto can witness it and capture it.
Hmm.
So I think like be there in the moment, but also like record it safely and write it down and keep it for the future. And I
Absolutely.
also want to shout out, I think like hybrid is hard, but I think like disabled folks I know have figured out, and it's a pain in the ass and it's hard. But the magic that happens where you can have this like secret third thing of like in-person disabled safer, really good Zoom online happening at the same time so people from all over can experience it. And
Hmm.
community safety, right?
Hmm.
Like actually having community safety. So you kick the trolls out, you kick the Nazis out, you kick the stalkers out. I think that that's stuff that is brilliant. And that's also skills that we also then take out to every other part of our
Hmm.
lives, right?
Hmm. And I
Yeah,
think that hybridity really forces us, force isn't quite the word because it's not that, but it encourages us, I think, to think
yeah,
about access more broadly and
yeah,
how to make sure that we are reaching people who may not be able to come in to a space in person for any number of reasons.
totally.
One of the things that struck me when we first started planning this event was that you have this beautiful document that outlines best practices,
Mhm.
requests, requirements. And it actually made me make one for myself because
Oh, yeah.
it had never occurred to me that one could do that. But it was such a thoughtful engagement with the idea of true access and really trying to accommodate as much as possible and then also leaving space for what we might not be able to account for.
Mhm.
And so as you work across genres and prepared different events. How do you advocate for your audience? And what are the primary considerations? Because it seems like you are not only focused on yourself, but you clearly advocate for yourself, but you also seem to advocate for the people who are going to be engaging in the work with you. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how you think through access.
Mhm. Do you mean like how do I advocate for access for folks who are attending?
Yes, for people who are
Yeah,
going to join you in a space,
yeah.
whether it's ventilation, masking,
Mhm.
what kind, it's rare to encounter. And
Yeah.
so I would just love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. No, thank you for that question. First of all, I just want to say I love that that Access writer inspired you to make your own. And there's a quality of like disabled culture and politics that like to me really is about like radical permission giving and also like radical hospitality. And
Hmm.
I know I talked a little shit about possibility modeling, but like, I mean, to answer your question going back, like I learned how to do that because other disabled folks modeled for me that I could ask for that. Like what you just said about like, oh, I didn't know it was possible. Um, Not speaking for you, but I know that for me, I mean, I've been physically disabled since I was 22, right? And
Mm-hmm.
also growing up like working class, mixed race, brown, whatever, like, and my mom's a polio survivor and is a working class white and Roma woman. She grew up before the ADA. She didn't ask for shit. She was like,
Hmm.
they're just gonna fire me, right? And I think that, at that like confluence of like immigrant, like daughter of immigrant, kid, like child of immigrant, like class, everything else. I really got raised on the like, you don't get to ask for stuff because that's for people. First of all, that's entitled, that's spoiled. Second of all, no one's going to give it to you because you're barely in the doors who you are. So don't make waves any more than you already have to. And yeah, I think, there was really a sense like I remember I had this conversation with my mom where the 80, I don't even think the 80 had passed yet, but she was a teacher and she was like, oh yeah, and she, like many teachers, there was a hiring freeze in the public schools in our state, so she got hired to work private, which is like fancier, but you get paid nothing and you're not unionized. And she was really struggling working with a lot of privileged kids, and she was like, oh yeah, there are these like upper middle class white boys at the school where I'm working who are, getting labeled as having learning disabilities, and that's really interesting. And I remember saying like, yeah, I think I might have something like that. And she just looked at me and she was so afraid. And she's like, you don't get to ask for that. Like you need to get straight A's and get the hell out of there and get a scholarship. Like that's not for you.
Mm.
And then I remember years later when the ADA passed, I was like, are you going to ask for accommodations? And they were like, she was like, they'll just fire me. They'll hire someone who's younger and needs it less. So backstory. And then fast forward to it's 2009 and I'm working with Sins Invalid for the first time, and I'm in a circle of much more seasoned disabled artists, and we're doing an access check-in, which I've never done before.
Hmm.
And Patty's like, "Yeah, before we start rehearsing, we're going to go around in a circle and we're going to see what we need to be here." And I'm watching people like Aurora Levins Morales, who's an incredible, elder maestra, Puerto Rican Jewish disabled artist, explaining what her needs are. Like I'm listening to deaf performers talk about, okay, don't get between me and my interpreter. We're witnessing like, and I'm just witnessing people doing it really matter of factly. Like, of course, our bodies have and deserve to belong and deserve to have what they need. And then we got to me and I was like, I'm good. I'm good. I just need a chair. I'm fine. But then like the seed was planted and I was like, maybe if the chair could be soft, it would be okay. And then like all these years later, I just like built it out slowly where I was like, let me ask for what I need to be in the room. And like you said, it's not just about me, it's also about who can get in the door, literally. So when I was doing much more like in-person work, I was like, yeah, like I ask for forms of access that I don't personally need,
Hmm.
but I'm not going to do a talk that's about disability in a wheelchair inaccessible space. I'm not going to do a talk that's about, disability, deafness, difference, etc., where there's no ASL interpretation and there's no outreach to local deaf community, right? And what you said about like we build it, these aren't exactly your words, but just that like disability is iterative and you build
Hmm.
access over time. Every disabled space I know, is probably doing better than an, abled space in terms of access, but like it's not like we come right out the gate and we know everything. Like I've
Hmm.
watched Things Invalid build so much more accessibility over time. I mean, we didn't have a knowledge of neurodivergence so much when we started. I remember Patty, with so much respect, she was like, you've got to memorize all your pieces. And it took me a while to be like, hey, actually, I need to print my script out. I can't memorize a 15-minute piece. It's going to be messed up. And there's a phrase that I've heard a lot and I use that's like access gives that birth to access. Like when I ask for stuff, it allows people to know that you can do it too, and that it's not demanding, it's not being a diva, it's not like, oh, I want like white calla lilies and like only the red M&Ms. It's actually creating a space of justice. And something I've written a lot about too is that, as a disabled performance artist, the spaces we make as disabled performance artists, they are kind of like little moments of the world that could be, where for those 2 hours, you're not only witnessing and participating in disabled art on stage. I mean, I'm just thinking back to like the first Sins and Knowledge shows I went to, where I was used to like, you go and maybe there's a million stairs, like it's really late, it's loud, whatever. There's like maybe no wheelchair accessible seating, maybe there's one crappy seat. And one of the first things I noticed moving in was I was like, oh, they've taken out the first 3 rows of seats and it's all wheelchair, scooter, and walker users. And everybody's flirting with each other,
Mm,
and like those are the good seats. And that on top of like this very multiply kinds of disabled, very queer, very black and brown audience, I was like, oh shit, I don't have to hate myself. Like this is the world to come.
mhm,
So, I mean, I guess in short, like that's what I'm always practicing when I'm booking a gig. I'm like, hey, so you can bring me, but you also have to bring the disability. And you don't just have to accommodate me, you have to accommodate everybody.
mhm.
And if there's a problem, we'll figure it out. Like, we'll just figure it out. Like I've been in spaces where the ramp broke and I'm like, okay, let's get plywood, like something,
Right.
something always falls apart. It's like Crip Murphy's Law, whatever can happen will happen.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Great. We have some questions from audience members, and I would love to get to a few of them.
awesome.
Tiffany asks, as a disabled Asian person, I have not accepted my disabilities. Your poems feel so bone-chillingly relatable. How did you seem to overcome ableism, I think internalized ableism?
Oh, I am still working on it, trust me. Um, Laura Hershey, who I quoted, has a poem called You Get Proud by Practicing, right? And it's really beautiful. And yeah, I think it's about that. None of us are born proud. And well, so I think we are born proud, and then ableism and this world really teaches us to hate ourselves, right? Including sometimes our own loved ones and community, which is really hard. I think that, and I don't want to simplify this because, all disabled love and community is not a utopic kumbaya statement. But I did learn to love myself by seeing and learning and meeting with other disabled folks who didn't hate themselves. And
Mhm.
it really helped when they started not all being white. You know,
Mhm.
but I will say that one of my first experiences, and this is up because my show was just in Toronto, um, was seeing a film called Want by Dr. Laurie Erickson, Lorrickson, who's a white Southern queer femme power chair user. And it's a short porn film where she's like, I want to be the kind of girl you can fuck in public. And it's shots interspersed of her waiting for the bus, and there's, 3 go by without the ramp, and her having sex with her trans boyfriend in the wheelchair accessible stall. And I just was like, fuck, I never saw anything. I mean, our bodies and disabilities are different, but I had been living with so much shame and mostly just trying to pass as able-bodied in terms of being a disabled, chronically ill brown femme who was trying to have sex. I was like, oh no, I gotta just fake it. And anytime my body can't keep up with, the, abled, 38-year dash, of normality, let alone also being an incest survivor, I'm just being a bummer. And I
Mhm.
absolutely went up to Laurie and was just like, I don't know if I'm disabled like you. I'm disabled differently, but I really related. And then she was like, do you want to come to this disabled queer reading that me and my friends were about to do and read? And I was like, what? And I thought it was going to be really depressing. And then one person did this choose your own adventure where it's a zombie apocalypse and 4 different kinds of disabled queer people were having an orgy and they had to escape the zombies without leaving anyone behind. And I just rewrote my whole piece where I was like, wow, I didn't know it could be like this. So, it helps. Like finding other disabled Asians helps. Including the parts where we're not actually, like so many of us are raised, not all of us, but so many of us are raised to minimize and deny our disabilities and to be the exception and to be like, oh, I overcame it, And so we're not taught to be something other than, and we're also not taught to be in friendship or relationship with each other. So
Mhm.
learning how to do that and not be the only one takes time. And it's like being queer people of color who find each other for the first time. There's love and there's also a lot of dynamic that you have to unlearn.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, read disabled Asian books, hang out with disabled Asians, like practice, like know that like loving yourself and that you can love yourself and you don't have to love every aspect of disability. I don't like my hip pain from my collapsed femoral head socket. I don't love it, but I've really practiced being like I have a right to be here, and that practice rubs off. Yeah,
Thank you
thanks for
so
that
much.
question, Tiffany.
Nova asks, what advice would you give to young disabled people to imagine a radical future where we get to see 50 and beyond?
hmm Wow, the easy questions. Well, I just turned 50, so it's possible. Um, Fight, really fight, fight. And by that I mean like fight against this machine that's trying to kill us with, the end of Medicaid, the end of the ADA, the end of everything good. And also really learn about your disabled ancestors who lived before any civil rights legislation. Create spaces of liberation for each other, whether even if it's two people on a heating pad in bed or on Zoom. Um, I mean, I think that like that's some of my work now, and I'm going to be real with you. Some things that are hard for me is that I am lucky in that I have disabled peers my age and some disabled elders who are older than me, but I've had a lot of people I love die. I've outlived a lot of people I love, and it sucks. And Patty, for example, was an incredible mentor, and she just passed just a few months ago, and she was just 5 years older than me, and I wanted her to live to be 70, 80, 90, you know? So I guess what am I trying to say? That we have to fight for the conditions where we get to have our surgeries, our hormones, our healthcare, our housing, all of it. And that also, I really mean this, not as a soundbite. I really mean this. That, like the survival that I see happening is because we're refusing to abandon each other and because we're fighting for each other's survival. Like I'm in Philly because I have friends, and I'm in community space where I can go to Black Star, which is a Black Revolutionary Film Festival that requires masking, and that's accessible and that has captions. And that didn't just happen. People fought for that. I can go to Hot Bits, which is a mostly BIPOC, all queer and trans porn festival that is accessible and has masking. And that is part of my living to be 50, 60, 70, is that I get to be in public queer Black and brown sexual spaces that are also disabled,
Mhm.
right? I feel like some of my work is going to be continuing to tell the stories of like, well, what does it mean to be disabled in 50 and me and above? And this journey that I've been on this week, like I've been hanging out with a lot of friends and peers who are also in our 50s and figuring out ways where we're like, yeah, like some of us don't live in the city anymore. We go in and we're doing our artwork, and in some ways we're doing it more than we did when we were younger. My chosen brother, Zavisha, Zavisha Chromich, Chromicz, who's an incredible Roma disabled artist. We're actually giving a talk on Wednesday. And he's like, yeah, I've made art my entire life, but I only was able to start actually making what people are now like, wow, you're like mid-career, and it's in galleries 4 years ago. And he's like, it's because I was able to get to a place where I've got accessible housing and community and acceptance of neurodivergence in a different way. So I really look forward. I always want intergenerational relationships. It's one of the million things we're not encouraged to have as disabled people. And also, being a disabled elder is not automatic. Like, elderhood is a practice. Like, you can be older and be an asshole and be incredibly toxic. So, it's also as part of that intergenerational exchange of here's how I'm doing it. Um, I want to be able to be learning with and together with folks who are younger than with me. And I want to be able to continue to practice being somebody who's older in a way where I'm being ethical and I'm not being a jerk, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. I hope this answers your question. I also want you to believe that you have a future and that you don't just have to burn the candle real hard and die at 25. And find the disabled memoirs that are out there. There's lots of reading lists in the back of all my books. There's a lot of us who made it and who are making it. And I'm going to stop running my mouth, but I think you get a gist to that question
Mhm.
of the
Yeah,
answer to
I
that
think it's
question.
important to remind young people that some of us do survive, and
Yeah.
when you're in a marginalized community,
Mhm.
and thrive even while doing so. So I think that was an amazing answer. Gabriel asks, Is there a point where advocating for yourself to people and systems is wasted spoons when facing various burnouts? Community is access, but at this point in burnout, survival feels resigned, grieving,
Mhm.
retreat to just be in the safety of myself,
Mhm.
alone, and protected from society. Because conversations with disproportionate harm at this time of burnout is so costly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just going to keep saying diversity of tactics over and over again. And I think that I know that for myself, there's times where I'm burnt out and I'm like, fuck, I still got to call the hospital or I still got to, and I know like everyone who's asked, like, how do you keep going? Everyone's like self-care. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sick of that sentence. But like, I really mean it and I mean it not in a pat way. Like I really fiercely, especially as like an older autistic person, I really fiercely guard my time offline, like in a way that I didn't used to when I was younger. I used to really just survive by hyper focus. I was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna work till 3 in the morning. I'm gonna read these 5 books. I'm gonna write this. I'm gonna just go, 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 go until I crash. And I still love hyper focus sometimes, but also I think it surprises people now. I'm like, no, when I say I'm offline on the weekend, I really mean it because I do a lot and I pace myself in ways that I didn't know how to do when I was younger and that sometimes weren't accessible for me because I just had to work the job or do the whatever. But especially since I finally got COVID last year and I have a better case scenario than I could have, but I'm still living with long COVID symptoms and I absolutely had cognitive stuff. I have been forced to learn how to pace and slow down and stop. And I've been forced to really take care of myself better when I'm in burnout and to fill my own cup. So that's one part of the answer. And I think just a part two I'll say is that I don't know if it's exactly all of what you're getting at in terms of the advocacy, but for me, it's less advocacy in terms of like fighting back against systems. And it's more that there's times where I will push on non-disabled Black and Brown communities, for example, to be like, you've got to get this because it's important. Or, I'm dealing with racism in like a mixed or majority white disabled space, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna say this or that or do that. And also, like a tactic I've used a lot is actually I focus my spoons on working mostly with disabled queer and trans BIPOC folks. And sometimes, on non-disabled BIPOC folks, because I'm like, mostly when I talk to y'all about disability, like half of you discover you're disabled. So, it's worth it. But I just, one of the places of burnout for me and a lot of other people have been fighting to get people to get it who don't want to. And then there's the racism on you, there's the this on you. And I'm just like, I actually save my spoons a lot and I do what I get something out of and what feels like a good use of my energy. I'm really, really selective of when I fight, like the 18th millionth fight about racism in mostly white disabled community. Cause I'm just like, fuck, man, you guys really refuse sometimes. And there's so much of a cost on me. I'm like, I'd rather focus on fighting where I get something out of it. And
Mhm.
it's obviously there's a million complexities and nuances, but like that's something that I want to say. And I guess I just want to say that like it's okay for you to retreat. And speaking to the grief place, it may look like I was busy the last 5 years and I was, but man, I lost my parents, my partnership at the time, three really, really good close comrades, and a lot of people who weren't as close. And there's been a lot of death. And I have spent a lot of time in my blanket on the couch grieving with the rose tincture. And that's not separate from the struggle. Like I needed to do that. I'm still going to do that.
Mhm.
And there's times I forced myself through it to do something else, but there's a lot of times where I was like, I literally, like after my mom died, like my last book had just come out, and she died like 3 weeks after, the month of press, and then, people were like, oh, okay, we'll give you 2 weeks, and they're like, okay, you want to hit the road again? And I was like, mm-mm. And I was like, I know this is like career suicide or not what you're supposed to do, but I was like, no, I'm gonna do the bare minimum because I really am grieving my mom, and I just don't have it. And anybody who doesn't get it can really just take a walk. And obviously, not everyone can do that all the time, but it was a choice I made because I was just like, grief really demands what it demands. And grief is a really huge part of disabled organizing.
Mhm.
So, yeah, take that grief time.
Um, do you have time for a couple more questions?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Great. Alexandra asks, as a 38-year-old living with MS and ADHD, working full time while also supporting family and taking classes, I often feel overwhelmed, burnt out, and depleted by the expectations of survival in these times.
Mhm.
Creativity is important to me, but it feels out of reach when I'm just trying to get through the day.
Yep.
What practices or mindsets help you reconnect with your creative voice when the world is too much and rest feels like a distant luxury?
Mhm. Um, when I can, I've called in sick. One time I made up I was in a small car accident so I could reschedule some work because I really need to just turn my phone off and do whatever I wanted. Um, I I'm trying to think. I don't remember who said this, but like I think June Jordan said this where she was like, poetry, there's a lot of working class and disabled folks who do poetry because you can write it on the bus, you can write it in 5 minutes. I do a lot of like this is going to sound bad. I will do a lot of like yelling into voice memos on my phone where I'm at a red light. I Ariel Gore, who's a queer single mama writer, she wrote about that a lot where she was like, yeah, it was me and my kid, and I would just be like yelling the poetry out loud, at stop signs, because that's when I could get it out. Um, I think there's a million examples, but just like finding the crypt practices that work for what you got are really important. And I think the practice of telling the world to take a flying leap sometimes and just being like, yeah, I mean, and I know there's all the things where that's, it's non-negotiable, but just the stealing time, and sometimes it means stealing time for things I really want to do, but where I'm just like, no, actually, I'm either stealing time to be creative or I'm stealing time to like actually do the stuff I need to do before I get creative, which is like doing nothing.
Hmm.
Like actually collapsing under the weighted blanket, watching my shows, doing my dumb shit. Ariel also said that like creativity, nobody does the last thing that's on the to-do list, and that when you were marginalized, sick, caregiving, etc., you always do the other stuff first because you have to. And then she was like, what if you try doing the creative stuff first? And that's something I've experimented with where I'm just like, okay, before I look at my phone, before I answer the like, can you do this text? Like, even if it's like 20 minutes, even if it's 10 minutes, can I just like tell everybody to fuck off mentally and do my writing first? And, I still wake up and scroll, but I also do that. And there's a selfishness that, or a self-focus that I think many women, trans, feminized, everybody, marginalized folks are not encouraged to have. We're encouraged to be of service to everybody else before ourselves. And I think that a lot of people will specifically go to disabled folks and be like, how dare you be creative? Like, you should just be like working for the gruel? So I think that like something that helps me is really holding that like it's an act of rebellion to be like, no, I don't just get to survive, I get to create, and I get to put that first, and everybody else can take a number. And that it can be weird. It can be your own disabled creative practice that does not look like Stephen King's or whatever, whoever the image is that you have in your head of like, oh, this is what a real writer or creator is. And that it can be bad. Um, and that it can be occasional. And that finding that crip writing space, like if it's like you have like somebody else who you can body double with once a week, once a month, like all of that stuff helps. Community helps. Those spaces help. Yeah,
Amazing.
be weird. Stay weird.
I think
Yeah.
that's a great note to end on, staying weird and creating space. Leah, truly, it's been an honor to have you join us here at Rutgers and to speak with our community. Thank you so much for all the work you do and for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. And of course, thank you to Liel and Letitia and our captioner Kay, all of whom have contributed. And of course, Nishi, who does all of the real work of planning these events and is an invaluable resource in addition to the Rutgers community. So thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Beck, and thank you so much, Roxanne, for everything you do in the world and for inviting me. It means a lot. And I am on a borrowed computer, so I can probably not cut and paste, but if you look up Tangled Art Gallery, my show's up till October 31st, and there's ways that you can view it virtually through virtual docenting or through Rosa the Robot. You can steer with your computer like it's a video game.
Oh,
And
wow, I'm going to check that
yeah,
out. That's
yeah, and
awesome.
no, I mean, I also want to end on like these are dire times, and there's still so much disabled creative possibility out there, and I really hope that the folks who are here, I hope and know that you're part of it. So I look forward to seeing your work in the world too.
Awesome. Well, thank
Yeah.
you. And everyone, good night.
Good night. Get some good rest.